Hello and welcome to another episode of Professional Book Girl. My name is Kayla and I read a ton of books that I can recommend the best to you. And today's a very exciting episode. We are continuing my favorite cities series. It is the London episode. I'm just gonna wait 1 second to start gushing about how much I love London. Really quick announcement. Our May book club pick is Funny Story by Emily Henry. I loved it so much, gave it 5 stars. It's my second 5-star read of the year. Book club is on May 30th. So if you have not read it yet, this is a perfect Memorial Day weekend read. Go grab your copy. I just recorded the book club episode actually today. I'm having a bit of a marathon record day and I just fell even more in love with it as I was recapping how much I love that book. So if you would like to be included in that episode, please type up your thoughts and DM them or email them to me at professionalbookgirlpod@gmail.com, or you can send a voice recording and I will play it during the episode. Please get those to me by May 28th. I can't wait for you guys to hear how much I love that book. I loved it so much. This is the second episode in this monthly series I'm doing about my favorite cities. The first episode was New York, which is where I live, and I talked a bit about how I came to live in New York City, my experience as a child growing up just outside of New York City. And just really, to me, it was that episode was a love letter to New York. I love living here. I can't imagine living anywhere else except for London. And if you are watching this on video, I'm actually wearing a London t-shirt right now that I got on my trip. It was $4 in Primark. And I was I feel like I have to. And it's actually very comfortable. I wear it a lot. I have always been obsessed with London, but just England as a whole and the culture. And I'm sure there are English people listening who are kind of rolling their eyes. And look, I get it. Sometimes when people talk about how much they, foreigners talk about how they're obsessed with America, I just feel, I don't even know when it started for me, honestly. My whole life, I first was really interested in Ireland. I remember getting books from my school library about Ireland because my family is very, very Irish. And I was always oh, I want to go to Ireland. And I still haven't been there yet. I'm planning on doing a big trip for my mom's 60th birthday in a few years. So I haven't been to Ireland yet. But then I was obsessed with Australia and I was I want to go to Australia. And I haven't gone there yet because Australia is the last place on my dream list, bucket list. I just want to go when I have a bit more money and I can fly across the globe comfortably and spend a long time there. But London and Paris have always been just my obsession cities. Right before I was going on my big UK trip, which I talk about so much on the show, and I'm going to get into it on this episode, my mom found this Facebook post I had written. It was one of those question and answer things from when I was 14. And it was I'm going to go to London and Paris one day. And I would always talk about it when I was younger, but I actually never thought that it would happen. And on my trip, I know I said that a lot, and I have another trip planned coming up in the fall, not quite as big as my UK trip, but I say it a lot when I travel, and I was thinking about it a lot when I was on my UK trip, and I was I'm sure it's annoying for people to see me on this type of trip and for me to be saying, I never thought I'd be here all the time, but I really never thought I would. Most members of my family don't have a passport. I didn't leave the country until I went to Canada when I was 16, but the first time I went to Europe was to London when I was 25, and I just got the bug for traveling then. I just always, people in my family and even my people I grew up around just did not travel internationally, especially to Europe. People would go to Mexico or the Dominican Republic and they were go on a cruise. And I always wanted that life. I didn't see it happening, so it didn't feel so tangible to me. And now that I do have that life where I've been to London twice now. Last time was for a significant amount of time. I feel I should just tell you guys now. On a few episodes, I think I said I'm really trying to get to Paris this fall. I'm going to Paris in October. I booked it. I booked my hotel the other day. The trip itself is, I think, an 17 or 18-day trip. I'm going to be in Paris for the majority of it. This is my Parisian trip, but I was I cannot be that close to London and not go. So I'm going to London for a long weekend at the end of the trip, and I'm going to be flying home from there. And it was really crazy how it happened because I had a flight credit that I had to use. And one day I was like, let me just look, because I knew I've been saying like I really want to get back to Paris um in the fall like of this year. And I found a flight for the exact amount of my credit, which I'd already paid off. So I was like, I have to book this right now. So I booked it. And so I'm going. So the Paris episode, I'll be talking a lot more about that upcoming trip. I'm going back to London for a few days. I can't wait. So I've been to London twice, and this will be my second time in Paris. And for me, with these cities like London and Paris that I always dreamed about, one time wasn't enough for me. So the first time I went to London, I was 25. It was fall of 2019. So only like a few months before COVID hit. It was very crazy how it happened. And I went for 1 week, but we did a bunch of day trips. So I wasn't even in the city for a full week. And I was just like, I didn't even scratch the surface of what I wanted to do there. And I feel the same way about when I went to Paris, which is why I wanted to go. I knew that was going to be my next solo trip. I'm trying to make these yearly solo trips a thing now, because I honestly can't even fathom traveling with people now. Solo trips are just so liberating. And the first time I went to Paris, we were only there for a week again, and we spent a few days outside of the city in Normandy, which was so magical. But I just didn't even scratch the surface of what I wanted to do in Paris. So I feel like the first time I went to London and Paris, but we're talking about London now, I was so in awe. And so I can't believe I'm here, that I felt like I couldn't even really take it in. And when I went back to London, then it was like, okay, I've seen Buckingham Palace before. I actually didn't get to see Big Ben the first time because it was under construction. And, but I was like, okay, the surrealness wore off. Like, it felt more real to me right away. It was surreal that I was there and living there for a month, which is what I ended up doing. But then on my second trip, I feel like I was able to really enjoy the city and learn the city. And I'm going to be staying in the same area where I did last time, because I know how to get around from there, which is so cool. When I got back from my trip, which if you're not aware, last March and April, I spent a month in London, which was always my dream. I didn't get to study abroad. It just didn't work out for me. And this was kind of my studying abroad. I worked from there for 2 weeks doing East Coast hours. So those days I would have until 2 or 3 p.m. before I had to sign on for work. And then I was working in coffee shops and restaurants, and then back at the hotel and sometimes in pubs. And then the second 2 weeks I was off and I traveled all around. And my favorite thing about that trip, which I think people were surprised when I said this, was when I realized I knew my way around and I knew how to navigate around, and the tube became so easy to me, and I could just walk places and I knew where I was going. And so people asked me for directions, and I was like, oh my God, this is so cool, because I love London so much. From the first time I went, my first trip, like I said, was in 2019. I went with two of my best friends. One of my best friends was studying in Cardiff at the time, and I just always wanted to go. And I was like, this is the perfect opportunity. I can go visit her. She came down to London. Me and my other friend flew over together, and we had it was such an amazing special trip. Like, I will always remember that. And my giant trip was like the trip, but this first trip was just so cool. And my friend who was studying in Cardiff had studied abroad in London, so she knew the city and was able to take us around and navigate us around. And it was just so surreal to be there. It just, when you've always dreamed of seeing something and then you're standing there and you're like, oh my God. And I just felt like a sense of belonging the first time I was in London, and then obviously on my second trip. And it's so stupid and so cliche to say that, but I said earlier, I was always interested in Ireland because growing up, we were always like, oh, we're 100% Irish. But my uncle dug into ancestry.com and records and things like that. And then when I did 23andMe, I am actually just as much English as I am Irish. I am literally all of the UK. I'm 99.9% UK. There's one random French ancestor that was in there somewhere back in the day. Maybe that's why I love Paris so much too. But my top two cities in my 23andMe were Dublin and London. And I know through my mom's side, I'm also Scottish. And then through my dad's side, I'm also Welsh. So it is that stupid cliche thing that people say when they visit places where their ancestors came from, that they feel a sense of home. And I felt that, and I've never gotten that feeling anywhere else. I went to Paris for the first time after I'd already been to London, and I was a little scared. I was a little am I going to want to move here? And I loved Paris. I loved it so much. I'm going back for like 2 weeks soon, but I didn't get that. I wasn't like, oh, I'm moving here feeling. And like, even when I went to LA, I was like, no, I'm not living here. Like, London is the only place I've ever felt that. And when I was there on my trip, I was like, some point in my 30s, I want to live here for like at least a year. So I'm just about to enter my 30s. So I have a decade to make that happen. I don't know how. If any British man is listening and needs a wife of convenience, um, I'm here because I want to live there for a little bit of time. But I love that city so much. I think because first of all, it's so beautiful and there's so much culture and art. And I felt this way in Paris too. There is so much history. And, like living in New York, there's so much history on every single corner, but it is so different over there. Like it is so much older. When I was in Edinburgh in Scotland, I was with my friend Alex's book diaries on Bookstagram, and we were in the St. Giles Church. And I was like, this church is older than my country, like than the founding of my country. And it is just wild. Like it's just like nothing I've ever experienced in the States. Not like we have beautiful things here too, but it's different. And I love it so much. I love Nando's and I love a chicken and leek pie, and I love that they put gravy on everything. And like I love the people, and I've always been so obsessed with the culture. Like I've just always been attracted to British things, men also included, but I always was watching British TV shows. When people watching Love Island, like I don't need subtitles for that. I remember when I was obsessed with Peaky Blinders, guys in my office were talking about it and they're like, we have to watch with subtitles. And I was like, I don't, because I had watched so much English television that I know all of the accents. Like I listened to so much British music. When YouTube was the big thing, I was only watching the Brit Crew YouTubers. I've just always been so interested in British culture and history, which I feel like you guys know. Like I'm like an armchair royal historian, which this episode is going to include a book about the royals. So I'll save that, how I got into all of that, for then. But I love it so much. And when I was planning basically how my UK trip came to be, I, for the first time in my life, was working somewhere where I could take 2 weeks off and I could work from anywhere in the world. And I remember I was sitting in my room and I didn't have any trips planned. And I love to always have a trip plan. That's why just feel so relieved that my Paris trip is officially on the books. I just love to always be planning a trip because I love traveling so much, and I already have ideas of what my 2025 and 2026 solo trips in Europe will be. But I was sitting in my chair where I read and I was like, I'm going to go to London next. And I texted my sister and I was like, do you want to go to London? And before she even answered, I was like, do you know what? I was like, maybe I'll go a week before and work from there so I could have 2 weeks from there. And then I was like, actually, even if she doesn't want to go, I'm still going to go. And then I just had it in my head, like, I'm going to go for a month. And it was so crazy. It was a lot of money, obviously. So worth it though. I don't regret any single penny that I spent, and I didn't ever not do something because of money, but it was a lot of money. And it was so funny when I got back and I did a Q&A, that was my number one most asked question. I was like, I'm not telling you guys a specific number. Like my parents didn't even ask me the number. I honestly don't even know how much I spent. It was a lot. Um, but how I planned the trip was I kept a running list of locations, and I took so many locations from my books. So I went to Bletchley Park, which is where it's the World War II code breaking place where they are in the Rose Code. I went to Chatsworth House, which is Pemberley and Pride and Prejudice, but it comes up in the Kennedy Debutante and all of these books about um, the Duke and Duchess of Devonshire, because that's their family seat. I obviously went to Hampton Court Palace, Tudors, Windsor Castle. I've been to Hampton Court and Windsor Castle twice, and I love them both so much. I'm literally trying to tell myself I don't need to go there again when I'm in London for a long weekend. What were my other day trips? I went to Arundel, which I found on TikTok, and I went to Hever Castle, which is Anne Boleyn's childhood home. I did a few days in Scotland. I was actually supposed to go to Paris for a few days on that trip, but that's when those protests were going on about the retirement age changing. And I posted on my story, and like I took it down after an hour, but Americans in Paris were telling me I should reschedule if I could. So I did not go to Paris. I spent a few extra days in Scotland, which I'm so glad that I did. But when I was reading, I would be like, oh, Belgravia, Marylebone, if that's how you say it. I'm sure I'm pronouncing things wrong. And I would write these neighborhoods in my phone. And then I made these daily itineraries. But so I made like 14 itineraries. And I literally was on Google Maps, like clustering things that were by each other that I knew I wanted to do. And then when I got there, I'd be like, okay, which one am I going to do tomorrow? So it was still flexible, but still planned. And for a trip like this, when you're trying to do as much as I did, you need to be planned. But the way that I mapped this out, because it was so much of what I read, it was so cool because I was able to picture scenes from books. But then now, even when I'm reading, I've been to these places, so I'm able to picture it like before having even gone. Like I made sure I went to the Ritz because it comes up in so many books. I went into the Ritz and I like worked there and had tea there one night, which was so wild. I went to like walked by the Savoy because these places just come up in so many books that I read. So I just love London. Like that is the moral of the story. It is my, besides for New York, I would say it is my favorite city. It's the only city I've been to so far where I can see myself living happily. Um, I just I just love it. Like when I was leaving, I cried on the plane ride home, which I've never done before. And I was like, I am leaving a piece of my heart in this city. And I'm so excited that even though it's just a few days, I'm so excited to get back. I'm gonna get a Nando's, a cheeky Nando's. I'm gonna have a pie. Probably gonna like go to Kensington Palace and maybe hopefully see some royals. My first trip actually to London, I saw the Queen at Windsor Castle, which was just insane and so magical. It was like seeing a unicorn. But yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to say about my trip in London. Also, something I love about London is the amount of bookstores. Like there are a lot of bookstores in New York, but I felt like every corner you were on, there was another bookstore, whether it was Waterstones, which is their main chain. It's like the Barnes and Noble of the UK, which I'm a big fan of Waterstones. And it's so funny the way that they're renovating Barnes and Nobles in the US. It looks like Waterstones now, like they are copying them. And also when we were there, I was so jealous of their rewards program. It was like a stamp program, and then you would get a reward once your card was full. And Barnes and Noble also just introduced that here. So they're copying Waterstones. But even all the amazing indie bookstores, Dawn's obviously is so gorgeous. I was surprised that was a chain. I didn't expect that. My favorite was Hatchards by Piccadilly Circus. It's just so beautiful in there. Where else? Notting Hill Bookshop, I thought was really, really cute. I got a really cute tote from them. I just loved as you were walking around, like there were so many bookstores everywhere. It just, I don't know if I was paying attention to it differently, but it really struck me. And obviously I would pop into all of them because, oh, also Foyles. I love that one too. And I didn't get to spend as much time in Foyles because I popped in quickly after I ate dinner. And it was hard the days that I was working because once I was on, like I was like, I didn't want to work to get, didn't want to get in trouble with work, even though I was more worried than my boss was. But if I was like in transit, like I popped into Foyles on my way back to my hotel and I just felt like I didn't have a lot of time. So I'm excited to go back to Foyles when I go back to London in the fall. But this is a great segue. So on my UK trip, I was on a treasure hunt for a certain book series that I have already spoken about on this show, but I'm talking about it again today because maybe you didn't listen to that episode, or if you just need a refresher. Like 30 something episodes into the show, it's getting a little hard for these theme topics because there are ones that I'm like, I have to talk about that for that theme. So some of you can probably already guess what I'm going to be talking about. The first book on the London episode is the Magnolia Park series by Jessa Hastings. I literally cannot talk about London and not talk about this series because it has become so synonymous with my trip. So, before I tell you what it's about and my thoughts on it, what happened was before I went to London, I had a list of books I wanted to buy there. It was like I wanted a vintage Narnia set, which I finished reading now, but I started reading on that trip. I wanted Nick Grimshaw's memoir because it wasn't sold in the States, and I used to listen when he was on the BBC Breakfast Show. I would literally listen to it while I was working. I think he's so funny. And I right before I went, had saw on Instagram that this book series, Magnolia Parks, was going to be published by Dutton in the States. And I saw what the UK covers looked like, and I was like, oh, I'm just going to buy them there, and then I'll read them on my trip, whatever. It turns out they were so hard to find. I'm so curious when I go back if they're going to be everywhere now, because they've had a bit of a moment. And I know from my inside sources, aka my friends in the UK, that the new covers are now being sold there just like they are in the States. But I wanted the original covers. And once I set off on this mission, I'm very like, if you tell me I can't do something, then I am going to do it. And it felt like every bookstore in London was telling me I could not get the full box set, wink, wink, if you've read these books, of this series in the UK covers. And at this point, only those covers were out. And I was like, well, fuck you. I am getting all of those books. So I was on a treasure hunt to track down this series. And it was so interesting because at first I was like, they're fiction. So I was looking in the fiction sections. And then I ended up, the second book that I found was at Foyles. It was Daisy Hates. That one was in the YA section. And then some of them were in the romance section. So then I got to a point where I would pop into every bookstore I saw, even on my day trips, looking for these books. And then when I realized they were being classed in different sections, I went back. So I went to like every bookstore in London multiple times looking for these books. I found the first one in Bath at Toppings. I really loved Toppings. There's one in Bath. There's one in St. Andrews in Scotland, which I didn't go to, and there's one in Edinburgh, which I went to. I like the Edinburgh one more, but the one in Bath is also really beautiful. And when I was there, they had the full series, and I don't know why. I feel like it was the universe saying, you're going to be on this fun treasure hunt that's going to become like a bit of a series on your Instagram account. I only bought the first book because in my head, I was like, well, what if I don't like them? And this was only a week into my trip. So I knew it wasn't easy to find them, but I thought I didn't think it would be as hard. So I bought the first book. Also, something that I realized when I was buying this book, books are so much cheaper in the UK. And when I said that to the salesperson at Toppings in Bath when I was buying Magnolia Parks, and she was like, it's because they're not taxed, which is interesting, number one. But I was like, even like before the pound to dollar translation, before the tax, they're just marked so much cheaper. So then I was like, I obviously have to buy books on this trip because I'm saving money. Even if it was only a few dollars, it just felt like getting a deal to me, that like retail psychology. So I found the first book, Toppings in Bath. And then the second book, like I said, I had just gone to Sticks and Sushi for dinner, which I loved so much. I would get this roll there. I actually think it was called the New York roll. It was like New York Subway roll. And it had garlic in it, which I've never had with sushi. And it was so delicious. I went to 3 different Sticks and Sushi locations on my trip. And I'm sure there are maybe Londoners listening who are like, it is so, like it was pretty expensive sushi, but I loved it. I thought it was so good. I went to the one in Soho, which is this day that I'm talking about. I also went to the one in Chelsea, and then the one, I don't remember exactly where it was, but it was that area kind of like behind Buckingham Palace. And it seemed a little like officey. I don't know. And it was in kind of like a shopping center, I guess. I don't know. No one cares. But so the first one, something about my trip, that I don't know if I ever even said this, I got like a little bit sick because I get very run down and then I get sick, and I was doing so much. So I had a feeling it was going to happen, and my body was like, you need to slow down. So I had like spent the whole day in the hotel this day, but I made this dinner reservation. So I was like, I'm still going to go. So I went, I'm pretty sure I was reading Magnolia Parks 1 when I was there. And then on my walk to the tube, also on my way to the tube, I walked by Kumail Nanjiani. So that was like a fun little celebrity sighting. But I passed Foyles and I was like, let me just pop in. And I literally was only in there for like 5 minutes. And in the romance section, they had Daisy Hates. And I remember like freaking out. I was so excited. I think they had Magnolia and Daisy, which is books 1 and 2. And at this point, there were 4 books out. There's now 5. So I needed 2 more. And it was like so funny. I ended up like finding them in the order that I needed to read them anyway. And then the third book was like a week later. I was in Scotland with my friend Alex, who I mentioned, and we were at the Toppings there, and they had book 3. So it was so funny because like she wanted to read them too. So like she knew we were on this quest, and it was just like hysterical, like the way how excited I was when I finally found it. It literally felt like a treasure hunt. And then I'd finished reading all three and I wanted the fourth one so badly. And I was really getting worried at this point. We were getting into like the third week of my trip. So I cheated slightly with this one and I ordered it and I had it sent to the Daunt in Holland Park because this book series takes place in Holland Park, which is a neighborhood in London. So it felt very like serendipitous to have it delivered to that one. They did have a few in the series there, but just not the one that I was looking for. So I picked it up the night before Easter. I like joked and I was like, it's an Easter miracle. And I had all four of my books there. I read all four of them on my trip. I have since read a new one has come out since, and I read it in New York. And it was so weird reading it because I remembered thinking on my trip, oh, when the next book comes out, I'm not going to be in London reading it, which was really sad. But I love this series so fucking much and like read it anywhere in the world. But if you can read these books in London, like that's the way to read them because they are so London. Like I'd never heard of Holland Park before these books. And then I'm walking around, I was like, oh, I was staying right near Holland Park. At one point in like the third book, someone moves and it was on the block where I was staying. I was like, I am in this book. It was just like it was the coolest, honestly, the coolest reading experience of my life. I don't think I will ever have anything like that again. Just that treasure hunt for them, the feeling of finding them all in all these different locations scattered across the UK, and then reading and enjoying them in the city where they take place. And I just love it so much. So what is the series about? First of all, it's called the Magnolia Park series, but books 1, 3, and 5 are about Magnolia Parks, and books 2, 4, and then what I've heard is that 6 and 7 are both about Daisy. Magnolia's story is finished. It was finished in the one that just came out, which Magnolia Parks Into the Dark. And then I heard that we have 2 more Daisy books, and then that is the end of this series. So the first book is about Magnolia, and this whole series though is Gossip Girl meets Made in Chelsea meets like The Sopranos, which signed me the hell up. It's no surprise that I was obsessed with these. And the best way to describe them is that they are ridiculous and dumb and fun, and that is why they are perfect. So Magnolia Parks is this like major socialite it girl in London. Her dad is a famous record producer. Her mom is a Russian supermodel. She is just the it girl on the scene, kind of like a Blair meets Serena vibe. Like she was really the two of them in one, which I'm rewatching Gossip Girl right now, so it feels like more poignant to say. And it really is like Gossip Girl, how they are all friends, but kind of like interdate within the friend group. Like that is the same vibe here. There's a very large friend group at play. Magnolia is in this toxic on again, off again relationship with BJ, who their relationship is so, in the first book, is so toxic that I was like, anyone in real life I'd be like, run. But it's in this world, in this series, like it just goes together. And here's my thing with the first book. I actually found Magnolia herself to be very annoying. And I gave the first book 4 stars. And I just like she really annoyed me. And she continued to annoy me throughout the whole series, but she does get better. And I tell people, if you were a little bit on the fence with the first book, you have to keep reading, because the second book is when we switch over to Daisy, who is my favorite character. And the second book takes place at the same time as the first book. And it's the same situation with books 3 and 4, and then I'm not sure what's going to happen with the second half of the series. I'm assuming book 6, which is what's next to come out, the next Daisy book, will be at the same time as Magnolia's last book, which we just read a few months ago. So Daisy, my favorite, her brother is Julian Hayes, my favorite. He's like, on this podcast I described him as like a hot young British Tony Soprano, so I'm obsessed with him. And he's the biggest gang lord in London. And Daisy, he raised Daisy and they're very close. And I really loved their relationship. And she's in this crime world, which I also loved reading about. But she is just so cool. And I think I loved her so much also because she thinks Magnolia is so annoying. So I felt very seen with that. But the way that the books are told is so interesting, because in Daisy's book, you're so immersed in her story. And that one especially is the first introduction to her fully. You met her in little glimpses in Magnolias, but it's taking place at the same time as book 1. So then you'll see little interactions, or you'll be at a party that you saw in the first book, but from a totally different perspective and storyline. And it just makes it so so interesting. I really can't like say too much more about what the book's about. You kind of like follow them all in their lives. And when I say it's like Gossip Girl, I think about it in that vein. Like crazy dramatic things happen, lots of on again, off again, dating, drama, etc. But as much as Magnolia annoys me, she is a strong female lead. Daisy really is like the strong female protagonist, but I do love both of them. I just really prefer Daisy, and I fucking love Julian Hates. I just think I love the Hates, and I can't wait for the next Daisy. I actually think this is the first time I'm ever saying this. I think I'm going to do a reread when we know the next Daisy's coming and reread all of them. That's what I just decided I'm going to do. But books 3, 4, and 5, I gave 5 stars. The last Magnolia, I think I gave it 4 stars. So to me, this is really like a 5-star series. I'm just obsessed. Like, it's so much fun. It's so ridiculous. I love it so much. There's so much fashion, pop culture, just everything I love in this one series. I could talk about it literally forever. It's a 5-star series. That is the Magnolia Park series by Jessa Hastings. Next book is The London House by Katherine Reay. I covered this vaguely in like a monthly wrap-up episode, which is just going to be kind of par for the course because of how I do those episodes. But when I was thinking today about which London books to talk about, not even just because it had London in the title, but I felt like I had to discuss this one because when I was saying earlier that during my trip, I went to these neighborhoods where all of my books take place. And then after my trip, I'll pick up a book and I'm able to picture it because I literally have walked these streets. And that happened to me so much in this book. Most of it takes place actually in London, the neighborhood where her mom lived, like just like the square. I was like, oh, I walked through there. Like the garden they mentioned, I was like, yeah, I walked right by it. And it was just very, very vivid to me. And then there's also scenes in the countryside, which I had the same experience. Oh my God, such a side note. I can't believe I forgot to mention this in the beginning of the episode, though. I also went to Highclere Castle, which is the real life Downton Abbey. And that was the coolest freaking day of my entire life. But that just popped into my head because I'm like imagining scenes in this book in the countryside. And I was like, it was very like Downton vibes. So what is this book about? Our main girl is Caroline, and she grew up knowing that she was named after her grandmother's twin sister, but she thought that the twin sister, Caroline, had died as a young girl, and she really didn't know anything about her. She's from this old money, kind of like stiff upper lip British family, but she's American. Her dad is from like a very prominent English family. I think her mom might be American. And growing up, she would go to visit her grandmother at the London house. And there was always a lot of tension in the household, specifically after her older sister passed away when they were children. And she kind of blamed herself for what happened, which is like she works through it in the book, but she was a child. Like it was in no way her fault. It was a crazy freak accident that happened, but her family really closed up after that. And she's pretty close with her older brother, but there's a big age gap there. So she kind of felt a little bit on the outside of her family. They were never this like loving, close knit family. But she would always go to the London house, which I'm pretty sure is in Belgravia, which I probably walked by the house that inspired this house. I'm wishing I could go inside and live there. But anyway, one day in the beginning of the book, she lives in Boston, which is like not really relevant, but there you go. That's where she lives. She's at work and they're like, hey, this guy is downstairs for you. And it's an old friend from college who maybe once upon a time they had feelings for each other. She hasn't seen him in like 10 years. And he's like, hey, I'm working on this story. So his job is interesting. People hire him to track their ancestry. And this family hired him to track this ancestor. It's a German family and they want to know what this guy was doing during World War II. And while he was researching that, he came across Caroline, the great aunt that our main girl is named after. And he found that she was a spy for the English, but she defected and married a Nazi. She's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Because she thought this woman died when she was a kid. So she goes home and she is like trying to form a relationship with her dad for the first time because he's sick and she's like taking care of him. And she mentions the Aunt Caroline and he like freaks out and he's like pissed about it and like doesn't want to talk about it. But this guy is about to publish this story. So she's like, give me like 72 hours. And she flies to London to the London house, which her mom now lives in and has refurbished it. And the way they describe how the mom has designed the house, I was like, I need to live here. So beautiful. So freaking cool. In my favorite city. So she is there, and as she's talking to her mom, basically the mom took care of the grandma, her mother-in-law, when she was dying, and she started opening up about her sister towards the end of her life. And the mom brings her all of these trunks, and they are letters that the OG Caroline wrote to her sister when they were younger. And what basically unfolds then is a dual timeline told through letters, which I love when that happens. And we meet them in like the 1920s, and she really is kind of like a bright young thing. Caroline is. She is out on the scene in London, kind of like a flapper socialite. She reminded me of Lily James's character on Downton Abbey, just doing things her family doesn't approve of, looking for an exciting life. And Caroline's grandmother is just much more of the like good girl, how the family wants her to be. And we follow through these letters as the war starts and the war effort picks up and the SOE and spies. And we follow her time in spying in France and Nazi occupied France. And we learn the real story. And the way that it was told was, it was so well done. I'm not going to say what actually happened, but I didn't know. Because in the beginning, you're like, obviously she didn't marry a Nazi. But then as it's going on, you're like, maybe she did. And I'm not going to tell you which way it went, but it was very surprising how everything unfolded. And I just really enjoyed this. And I gave it 4 stars. I really loved it. It was a really great kind of unique take on a World War II story. The family drama was very, very interesting, but some books jump off the pages more than others. And this one, in the terms of picturing and feeling like you're in London and capturing that atmosphere, really, really did. Also, there's one scene where her mom takes her to lunch/afternoon tea at the Orangery restaurant at Kensington Palace, which both times I have been there has been closed. So everybody say a little prayer for me that it will be open in the fall so I can finally have afternoon tea at Kensington Palace. But I remember reading that and being like, oh, I wanted to do that so bad. And the whole freaking month I was there, I couldn't. It's fine. It's fine. I'm going to get there. But I gave this 4 stars. I really enjoyed that. That is The London House by Katherine Reay. And this was my first book by this author. So I since have picked up a few. I actually have one. My laptop is sitting on top of it, so I can't find it. Her latest book is called The Berlin Letters. It's a post-World War II kind of East-West Germany situation that I'm planning on reading this week, actually. So I love this one so much that I was like, I need to read more of this author's books, which I just love when that happens. The final book is The Princess by Wendy Holden, and this is part of this author's Royal Rebel series. She has one about Wallace Simpson and one, I'm pretty sure it is about Queen Elizabeth's nanny, known as Croppy, who this was like a wild story. She was the nanny of Queen Elizabeth. Yeah, it is. It's called The Governess. She was the nanny of Queen Elizabeth and Princess Margaret, like with them through World War II, like the closest person in their life. And she wrote a book about her experience with the princesses, and the family just like completely cut her off after that. Like you can kind of understand why, but really interesting story. So this one is about Princess Diana. And when I saw this was the next in her series, I was like, okay, I was a little bit nervous. I don't know why I'm like nervous to talk about this, but if you follow me, you know, I don't really post about them as much because it's just gotten so contentious, but I have been studying and following the British royal family since I was in 6th grade. And I remember that vividly. I remember the day that I learned who Princess Diana is because my 6th grade, she was my English teacher and my history teacher. And she had a poster of Princess Diana up in the classroom. And it was that iconic Vogue shoot. She's wearing the Cambridge Lover's knot. And she is like, it's black and white and her hands are kind of like under her chin. I'm posting if you're watching on video. And I remember someone in the classroom asked who this woman on the wall was, and it was a big poster. And my teacher was like, that's Princess Diana. And she said something about how like she did a lot of good work with like children and sick people. And she said she died in a car accident. And I remember that moment so vividly in my life because to me, it was insane that a princess could die in a car accident. And I didn't know any of the details. I didn't know anything about Diana or her life. And I literally pictured in my head, I could still picture to this moment, just like at a busy intersection, just like a car accident, like what you would maybe sometimes see when you're driving. And I was just like, that is crazy. And I went home, and I'm pretty sure I had my own laptop at this point, and I would just sit. This is so nerdy of me. This was like my first Princess Diana was probably my first historical obsession. And then I thought it was so crazy that she was like alive while I was alive, even though she died when I was like 3, but still. And I would sit and research her and research William and Harry. And at the time, William and Harry had just done a Today Show interview with Matt Lauer, who, by the way, I hate Matt Lauer. He has been so rude to me when I've gone to see artists at the Today Show. His cancellation was, we loved that. We loved him being canceled. And I was like obsessed, just obsessed with, I don't even know what it fully was, but I just always, to this day, I love the history and the tradition and the glamour of it all. My girl Kate, I've been obsessed with Kate since, not in 6th grade. I remember like Googling and realizing like William had a girlfriend, but I will never forget where I was when I found out William and Kate got engaged. I was in 11th grade, and every other day I sat alone at lunch because people would have like A/B schedules. And I loved when I got to sit alone at lunch, because I would just like go on my phone or like get homework done. And I was sitting alone this day, and I had a People magazine app, which I hate that they got rid of. And this is part of why I have such an encyclopedic knowledge on pop culture, because you could like search by celebrity, and like every article and like a bio about them would come up. And I would do that that's all I would do. And I would do it all the time. William and Harry were on there, and I was obsessed. And it came up. Kate came out in that royal blue Easa dress, and I was like, from that day, I was obsessed with Kate. And obviously, the news recently hit me so hard. I did cry a little bit, and just hoping and praying for the best for her. But anyway, with Diana. So I have studied this woman. Like, I should have like a PhD and honestly the royals period, but like specifically Diana. And I go through phases, just quickly about like the historical context. I go through phases with like different eras of the family. So I obviously am like really interested in the Tudors, and then I've gone through phases a bit more with like Victoria. Queen Victoria's like not my fave, but her kids were like kind of wild. And then obviously the Edward and Wall Simpson of it all, and kind of just like different. I don't discriminate. Like, I just study the whole thing, you know? I can like, I don't remember how far back I can go. From the War of the Roses, I can name all the monarchs, but I'm not going to do it right now and embarrass myself because I'd have to think about it for a second. But when it comes to Diana, she was my first obsession, and I admire her so much. But I feel like because I know so much about her and what happened, I am very critical of how she's portrayed in media. Like, even I'm critical of a lot of what's on the ground, but she wasn't this naive victim. She was a victim in a lot of ways, but she wasn't totally innocent. She was doing things. Her and Charles used the press against each other. And I think that's when people die specifically suddenly and in a traumatic way, like Diana did, they tend to be sainted in death, which she was an amazing person. Like, she deserves that. But I think people forget, like, she wasn't an angel. And I've seen people say recently, like, it's interesting how if she had lived, how people would talk about her and Charles's antics in the 90s now, how he was portrayed as the only bad guy when she was up to some tricks too, which whatever, like, you got to do what you got to do. I really resonate, like, she could be petty, and that really resonates with me. But so when I heard that this Wendy Holden's next book in the series was about Diana, I was nervous and I almost wasn't going to read it. But I say that with every, like, more contemporary, I'm more critical of like contemporary royal media, like the last season of The Crown, because I know it better, I guess, like the history better. And I don't go into it, I try not to take ASAP. Like, I try to learn the full story. Like, I try to go in as like historianized, not like I love Princess Diana vibes. So anyway, I was nervous, but I was really pleasantly surprised with this book. And I think that the author did a really great job of capturing her best qualities. Diana was a remarkable person, and I don't want anybody to come away from this episode thinking that I didn't like her or she didn't deserve anything she went through. She did not deserve to die in such a traumatic, sudden way. Like that her death was such a loss for the whole world, really. Like she really was the people's princess. Um, but I love her. I have posters of her on my wall. Like I love Diana. I just feel like I try to look at her life as if she was an actual person, which she was. And sometimes with people like the royals, it's the same thing with celebrities. You stop looking at them as people, but they are people. I think the royals more so than even celebrities because they didn't choose this life. Although Diana, like a little bit did by marrying Charles. But anyway, this author did a really great job of showing her best qualities, of which there are many, while also showing that she was incredibly naive and had absolutely no idea what she was getting into. So this book opens when Diana is 13. And if you don't know anything about Diana, she had a very tumultuous childhood that plays such, like, she is fascinating psychology of like how her life played out. I highly recommend Diana in her own words, but you can also go on YouTube and listen to the tapes, which was so wild to hear her tell her story. I watched the now like problematic Martin Bashir interview because we learned that we know now, if you didn't know, that interview where she said there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was crowded. She was completely coerced into doing that. They lied to her and made her think that she was being followed, and she became by the end of her life, she was extremely, extremely paranoid. And it's because of these like at men wanting to profit off of her and like kind of placing that paranoia onto her. But this book takes place from when she was 13 through to her wedding day. And I have like my review I originally wrote up just to kind of refresh myself because I read this last summer. And I said, as someone who has literally studied Diana's life for fun since I was 12, huge nerd over here, I'm always skeptical about how she's portrayed in media these days. I could write a novel on this. While I do think she was an amazing person, she was her own worst enemy, and she tends to be sainted in most depictions, which her being her own worst enemy, I stand by that. Anyway, this passed my test. So since it covers life before her marriage, it's about her, like not the royals. Obviously that comes into it because it leads up to her wedding day. So you see her meet Charles, you see her decide to marry Charles, but you really get to learn about her as Lady Di, which I always find it so funny. My mom refers to her as Lady Di. It's totally a generational thing. My mom will always also talk about where she was when she found out that Diana had died. I really love this. I think if you are even remotely interested in not even just the royals, but Diana, then this is a great starting off point to learn about her. And if you like this and you're interested, like I said, I would recommend, as maybe controversial as the book may be, Diana in her own words, go on YouTube. There are like interviews and you can listen to those tapes from Diana in her own words, which is, like I said, just wild to hear her speak. And yeah, I gave that 4 stars. Like I was very happily surprised by how much I loved it. And I would love more. I don't know if I feel that way. I was just gonna say I would love more depictions of Diana like this in media. I think if they're done well, like this one was, I want more. If they're gonna just be like cheap shots, then no. But I'm a huge fan of all 3 of those books in that Wendy Holden series. I have so many royal historical fiction novel recommendations that maybe if you guys are interested in, that could be a separate episode. We can go through different eras. I don't know. Let me know. I used to post about the royals much more, but it has become such a hot button issue for reasons I'm not even going to mention that I kind of just stopped because studying them, and I'm even highly critical of them. I don't want anyone to think I'm like a blind worshiper, but it's just, I do that for fun, really, since I was 12, which is ridiculous, but that's just the story of my life. So I want to like protect my royal piece. Anyway, like the New York episode, I'm going to go through some London quick hits. These are book recommendations, and I also just decided I'm going to do some London recommendations too, because just the other day I was having a conversation over the DMs with a follower because she's planning a London trip. I posted to my story every single day showing what I was doing, and they're all saved as highlights. So you can go through and follow my trip. Sometimes when I just want to make myself like torture myself, I go through and watch them because it was the trip of a lifetime. Even though I'm planning another solo trip, I will never have another trip like that one. I think because it was in my favorite city. I fell even more in love with my favorite city. I just love London. Okay, London book quick hits. Anything by Lisa Jewell. Alison Ware, she does all of the Tudors. I think she goes back to like War of the Roses. That is like old royal history. So good. Philippa Gregory also for the same, but I'm currently going through the Alison Ware books. The Rose Code by Kate Quinn. Loved it so much. I went to Bletchley Park. Highly recommend Bletchley Park if you are going to London. You can do it in just a few hours. It's a short train ride out of the city. It's like a 5-minute walk from the train station. Felt totally safe. Do it. The Underground Library, which I discussed on my April wrap-up episode, The Last Dance of the Debutante, The Coronation Year, all of the Chloe Brown and the Brown sisters novels. They're romance books that take place in London, and then The Glittering Hour by Iona Gray. Really quickly off the top of my head, my London recommendations. In London proper, Tower of London, Covent Garden isn't my favorite, but I like had a nice big purchase there. It's cute. I bought a perfume at one of the stalls. Borough Market, I only went on my first trip because it was a little bit out of the way of where I really was on my second trip, but I'm going to probably go when I go in the fall because I want to try those strawberries. Westminster Abbey. I toured it both times. I loved it both times. I probably will go back. It's a really quick tour. So fascinating. I'm not a religious person. It's really, there's so many historic things inside of there. Like basically all the kings and queens are buried there. If you can, take a tour inside Parliament. I had a very basic understanding of how the UK government works, but you tour the Parliament buildings, which are so old. Like the main hall that you're in, I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head right now. It's like one of the oldest, like so many freaking historic things happened in there, and still do. Like they were like, oh, when Obama visited, he gave a speech here. Like so cool to stand inside that room. And then the rooms you go into, you can only take you can only have your phone out really in that first main room where you like gather for the tours. But then when you go through the halls of Parliament, and then there are these rooms that Prince Albert designed for Queen Victoria that were so beautiful. I learned so much. It just felt very, very cool to be in there. Highly recommend if you can get into a tour of Parliament. Do that is one of my favorite things that I did. I did a Churchill walking tour, which I probably could have done without, but tour the Churchill war rooms. They were very cool. And if you read Broadway True Historical Fiction, it's just like very cool and like timely, I guess. What else? I toured inside Kensington Palace both times. I probably will do it again because the last time I went, there was this fashion exhibit on that took over the Georgian rooms, and I would like to see them again. But you can go through the rooms Queen Victoria grew up in. I love KP. Walk through the park behind it, Kensington Gardens. It's really beautiful. Hyde Park, I walked through both times. The first time I went, I saw the Diana Memorial in Hyde Park. I didn't see it the second time. What else? I saw Six on the West End, which I want to see a show when I go again. And I'm like, I want to see Six again? But I'm like, maybe I should see something else. Let me know what I should see. Shopping, Harrods is really cool, but I'm not a big department store girly actually. So I did some really great, I shopped on Oxford Street, which is like super touristy, I know. But then in Notting Hill, spent time in Notting Hill. It's really cute, obviously. I found this store there, Giovanna London. They have a few locations, but the Notting Hill one was my favorite, and I like bought a new wardrobe there. I can't wait to go back and check out and get some more clothes. What else? I'm trying to think so quickly, and obviously I can't. Okay, tours that I did the Churchill one. I did my first night, I did a ghost tour, which is something that I like to do in any city that I visit because I prefer to do it in the beginning of the trip too, because you get a good sense of place, because you're literally on a tour, and then you learn like really funny, interesting history. And I really enjoyed the ghost tour. And then I did the Jack the Ripper tour, which I highly recommend if you're into true crime. It is so well done. My tour guide, I wish I remembered his name. He was so good. I literally told him, you need a podcast. I would listen to it. Oh my God, I can't think what else. Westminster Abbey, I said. Also, the second time I went, I was able to see, which Big Ben is the bell. It's Elizabeth Tower, which I now know. That was a real moment seeing that because it was covered the first time that I went. Something I want to do this time, which I haven't done either time, is the National Portrait Gallery. The first time we just did not have time. And then when I was there on my last trip, it was closed for like refurbishment or something. So I'm excited to go there. Oh my God. Also the V&A. I love that museum so much. Their fashion section is so good. Honestly, it puts the Met to shame. I love the V&A. I'm definitely going back there. Also something not like in New York, the museums are all free. So I just like, I'm not a natural history museum person, but I like popped in and like saw some dinosaur bones and whatever. That's honestly all I can think of right now off the top of my head. Always DM me check out my stories. If you have any more recs for my next trip, I'll only be there for a long weekend. So it's going to be me being busy trying to cram everything I didn't get to do on this trip in, and just so happy to be back in London. That is our show. Thank you so much for listening. Our book club pick is Funny Story by Emily Henry. That episode drops on 5:30. Get your thoughts to me by 5:28. Please make sure you're following, subscribe, whatever podcast platform you are listening on. Follow me on Instagram at Kayla Butt. Follow the show at Professional Book Girl. Leave a rating review. It would make me so happy. I will see you next week. Actually, I will see you on Thursday because I have a little surprise author interview for you.